braving the icy roads. Hopefully, breakfast drive you to get up early to join us today. My name is Eric Berry.
I'm Barb Peace.
We're both graduate students at the Humphrey School. This is our second event in a three-part series we're calling the Swain Climate Action Breakfast Briefings. Our first event was all focused on local action, so we talked a lot about city action plans. Today we're focused at the state level, so what we're doing in Minnesota regarding climate action. We were inspired by our experience in Glasgow when we attended COP26. Frank and Patty were also in attendance in that event.
I wanted to be.
He was there in spirit.
Sorry. Sorry. My bad.
So we were inspired by events we had in Glasgow, and we're excited to bring that model back here. The model was really, in-depth discussion on climate, but in an informal atmosphere. So we have some excellent trio of panelists this morning with all Minnesota state legislators. We have Representative Frank Hornstein, Representative Patty Pinkham, and Representative Todd Clifford. We're moderated today by Aaron Hansen. He's at the Institute on the Environment. He's an energy program specialist there, wears a lot of hats, does a lot of cool things, teaching courses and leading all sorts of things. So Aaron and our panelists, please come on up. I'll turn it over to you and we'll get started. Okay.
You lead the way. We're not.
Thank you
Sorry about that.
for joining us. To get started, we just love to just know a little bit more about each of you. Let's start by telling us where your representative district is, kind of the geographic region, and then a little bit about the demographic.
So I can start. I'm Todd Clifford. I'm the state representative for the Northfield area, and Northfield is just an hour south of Twin Cities. There are two colleges in Northfield, Carleton and St. Olaf College. My district is has two stories, so we have a very progressive community, some of the most progressive precincts in the state, and then half the district is as red as anywhere else in Minnesota. I'm someone who I grew up in a town of 700 people and a pastor in my other life, and influence in small communities. So I care about rural communities, rural areas, and the way the climate is already impacting rural people, and especially those who rely on the land for their livelihood.
Hi, everybody. I'm Representative Patty Pinkham. I represent the communities of Minnetonka, Plymouth, and Woodland, so suburban world. I'm in my second term in the legislature, and my background is in natural resources. And so I graduated from the University of Minnesota back in the days when there was a College of Natural Resources, which I know is no longer, so that probably says how long ago it was. But I now have a son that's going to college here in College of Science and Engineering. So my roots in the U are deep, and I appreciate it being here. But my passion for climate really came from my natural resource background, and super excited to be here today to talk to you all.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm State Representative Frank Hornstein. I represent a district in Southwest Minneapolis that also includes parts of downtown. And I think on climate, that is definitely one of the top issues. We're not talking to people, and we're not. So people are very concerned about the issue. Of course, many others, education. This does rise to the top. We've had a number of town meetings over the years specifically about this issue that are very well attended. My passion for the climate really comes from lifelong interest in environmental issues. I got activated when I was in 6th grade on the very first Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970. So I'm dating myself. But I went on to, I chose environmental studies as a major and in graduate school. So all of you public policy Humphrey folks, I have a master's in urban and environmental policy from Tufts University, and I went on to pursue a career in community organizing because that's, I was mentored and said, if you want to change the world, be a community organizer. And so part of that work, that's the group called Clean Water Action, where I was there for 7 years and worked a lot on energy issues, waste issues. And the legislature, I'm really, interested in the nexus of climate and transportation. So one last thing, I do teach a class, co-teach class in sustainability. So we have some class here and we spend a lot of time on climate. So really excited for this. Thank you, Bart, for
Yeah, I think you all peeked ahead at the questions. I was trying to slip that first one up. So yeah, next part of that question was to ask about your journey to climate. What threw you into the issue? And so, frankly,
well, that's why no need to take up more time. I'll let my colleagues.
And I think I peeked at it as well, my background in natural resources, and so just really the focus on the environment that I've had and recognizing how important it is to Minnesotans. And I will also kind of echo what Representative Hornstein said, that it's an issue that's really important in my district. I hear about it, probably it's one of the top 3 issues that I hear about consistently all along. And so, and it's, some of us, I submit and spent some time at Glasgow with several people that are here, and I think that was a transformative time for me in recognizing the urgency and importance of really needing to act now. So those are some of the things that.
And I think it's, for me, it's safe to say that my drive on climate is really rooted in my faith upbringing. And so I'm a pastor in the United Church of Christ. People ask what kind of churches do you see? I'll describe it as the last door on the left. So we're a denomination that doesn't see a conflict between understanding the science and living out our faith. I was taught from a very young age that we're to care for creation and also to love the neighbor. We're not doing a very good job either, but that everything that is around us is a gift. And our proper response is appreciation and care. And the climate crisis is showing us that we have failed in understanding our proper places in the world. So that's, to use a Christian frame, that's sin, that's separation from what's holy and what's so that agitates me. And I have 3 children, 18, 14, 16. I want them to have a livable future, and I think my grandchildren someday, I want them to have a livable future. And we're going to care for them and others, and offer them the sort of all that's been good that we've experienced.
Yeah, excited to see the Swain climate series bring Catherine Cato to the Homeowners school. So exciting connection there. Can you describe how you approach climate action with your position?
So I can start again.
Sure.
I follow Patty and Frank as much as I possibly can. So
That's a bad choice.
they're great. So I'm a really proud member of the House Climate Action Caucus, and Patty's a lead there, and so I shouldn't talk about that. And then one thing that's been exciting is the way that we've kind of taken some different areas of climate policy in House Caucus. And so Jean McGuinness, before in her last term, she said to me as I was entering in, you should focus on lands and agriculture. And I said, great, I'm interested there. She said, it's also like the hardest. I said, thank you. So I'm really interested in the intersection of agriculture and climate and the environment and climate. So I do a lot of work on soil health. And we're planting a tree for Minnesota in the next 4 years of 5.7 million trees. So I'm really interested in the ways that we can manage landscapes to mitigate climate change and also help us in the problems. So those are some places where I focus.
And as Todd said, I chair the House Climate Action Caucus, and it's a group of over 58 legislators in the Minnesota House, all really recognizing the importance of climate change in our need to address it. And so again, after Glasgow, I came home and realized that we need to be, acting urgently. And we find ourselves in Minnesota in this place where we have this surplus. And so there just really was an opportunity. So together with my colleagues, we put together a great proposal to really take bold action and some meaningful steps around addressing the climate crisis. And put forward a $1 billion climate ask. And so we are in the process of working those bills through the legislative process. Some of them are going to transportation, others to ag, the environment, energy. I also chair the House Climate and Energy Finance and Policy Committee. I have a lot of interest and passion around renewable energy, and so have done quite a bit of work in that space. And so I come to this with the recognition that we need to move boldly, and that we need to do that in this place in Minnesota that we find ourselves with divided government. And so sometimes that can be challenging.
So sometimes I'm asked, how did I get into politics, from an organizing background? And I was really inspired by the late Paul Wellstone, United States Senator, sees him smiling, and he was a community activist and an organizer, and he decided to, take the small shot run for the United States Senate and won. And, I observed him over the decade plus that he served. He died tragically in a plane crash in 2002, but he opened the doors of government to so many people who didn't have access, and was really there as somebody to give voice to grassroots movements. And so we have an amazing grassroots movement on climate. And so first and foremost, I think it's to give voice to that movement, and that's where I think this $1 billion ask comes from. As Frederick Douglass said, power conceives nothing without a demand, never has, never will. So that's one piece of my, the way I address climate in my legislations. The second is as chair of the Transportation Committee. Transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. I want to give a shout out to Laura Gregerman, who is a Humphrey student who's an intern of mine. So for those of you who aren't graduating this year, we've always given you some help. And she is, I have a little pad here. She's monitoring our committee, and we're doing a lot on public transit. We're doing a lot on the strategies that address climate. And actually, a little over 10 years ago, this institution was tasked with doing a report on what are the strategies in which we reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. And a report was issued, and the 3 recommendations are as relevant now as they were then. Land use, investments in public transit, bike walk infrastructure, and electrification of our transportation infrastructure. Those are really what we strive to do. And I'll just say, Representative Lippert's comment about land use is so critical. We're actually doing a bill to plant I don't know how many, a lot of trees.
Millions.
In the transportation, yeah, and then the transportation budget has a part of that. Small snow fence. So again, this just touches on so many areas.
Yeah. Some great initiatives there. So we like these questions were set up really well to move to the next one. To ask about those initiatives, which ones are you most excited about? Can you some clues there? Find frustrating.
We have some clues there too.
Yeah.
I will maybe just start and say that I do think one of the challenges is our divided legislature here in Minnesota. And unfortunately, climate change has become a partisan issue. Back in the early 2000s, it wasn't. And there was a lot of bipartisan efforts here in Minnesota. We passed the Next Generation Energy Act, which was a bipartisan initiative putting forward greenhouse gas emission reduction goals based on the best science of that time. It's now outdated and it needs to be updated, but it was the important piece is that it was a bipartisan effort. And unfortunately today we struggle with that. And so our way to kind of work around it is sometimes to have the same goal, but talk about it differently. And so, for example, there's a couple of bills I'm working on that are associated with folks here at the university. Dr. Heidi Root is one, and we passed a bill last year. It was going to be titled a small area climate study, and we changed that to a small area weather study. And the other side of the aisle was able to find that acceptable and recognize the importance and value it would bring to them and their communities. And so we're building upon that this year, and again, I was going to call it the Climate Mitigation Extension Program. And we've since changed the name to Weather Resiliency Extension Program. But the fact is that, unfortunately, I mean, I would like to call a spade and be able to use language that is appropriate and that we know is suiting the time. But it's in order to be able to get things passed, and that's what we need to do in order to continue moving forward.
The number one frustration is dealing with Republicans who deny climate change, but I can't admit that they need climate change because it would be political definite for them. And so, you know, an example was in a water subcommittee that, and I think it was before Patty was serving on it as well. We were kind of talking about our top priorities or top concerns and listing things out. And one of the items on the list was the volatility in the weather. And one of my colleagues who was a legislator and a farmer put that in as his number one. So farmers, whether or not they will say climate change is something they believe in, they know that the weather is changing them, it's impacting them, and they're really concerned about it going forward. And so I'm kind of in a couple lanes where there's more potential for agreement with Republicans on soil health practices. There's more and more interest among farmers in using cover crops and doing some things differently, conservation village, those sorts of things, because they know if the land becomes more resilient in the face of both extreme rain and extreme drought. When that happens, you can save the money. Fewer passes across the field, less fertilizer. So there's more interest there, as long as you know able to engage them more easily. If you're not talking about climate, so that's like definitely the drive for me. And there are many Republicans who want to plant trees and know that we need to be doing reforestation for a variety of things, and so that can be an area of agreement. But you know, they still want permanent tax cuts, and that makes it, you know, it's making conversations hard.
So I'll echo what my colleague said about climate denialism being just rampant. And, you know, that is a huge barrier. And, you know, I often think, well, how did we get here? Because as Representative Aiken said, you know, we had a pretty strong bipartisan coalition back in 2007 that passed that Next Generation Energy Act. It was a landmark bill. It was one of the strongest renewable energy standards at the time in the country. We haven't made much progress since then. Why? We have to name it. It's the power and the lobbying and the money of fossil fuels. And what I would recommend to you, and I'm not an expert on Netflix and how to access movies, but there is a wonderful documentary called Merchants of Doubt. And this, if you haven't seen it, this really traces this whole effort, right? And it really began in, you know, shortly after the 2008 election, you know, when Obama was elected, and these types of laws were being passed all over the country. They really made an example, and I won't get into the details, but there's a really interesting case study of a Republican congressperson, very, very conservative from South Carolina, went down to Antarctica and came back and said, whoa, this is an issue. In primary, a lot of money from the fossil fuel industry, progress, et cetera. We lost the, I think his opponent got 75% of votes. And at that point, then things really started. There was a domino effect, and this now became, you know, a very heated, polarized issue. It wasn't always the case, and environmentalism wasn't always the case. You know, all of those landmark environmental bills, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, the creation of the EPA in the early 70s, coming out of those first earthquake protests, those were bipartisan issues. Richard Nixon signed them. So it wasn't always like this. I'll just leave you with maybe a small glimmer of hope. And that is on this question. And that.
There's hope elsewhere too.
A lot of hope elsewhere with all the grassroots organizations. But, you know, this last, you know, when I first ran, you know, my Democratic opponent, said, no, it's fine and good that Frank's a community organizer. But organizers don't have the skill set for the legislature. So my team said, don't respond. But you know, one of the skill sets is, you know, building relationships. And so the hope is that you know, we have divided government, only Minnesota and Virginia, 2 states that have divided government. We have to figure stuff out sometimes, especially last year with the budget. If we didn't do a budget, there would have been a government shutdown. So in transportation, again, I had a partner who was very quite conservative, but you know, he understood, you know, my interest in at least having arterial rapid buses. You know, that was really one of the things we wanted to get last year. And yeah, the business community come and testify and say this is a good thing. And said, okay. And you know, it was a big breakthrough. And we got an electric bus transition plan. First time, a small but you know important precedent getting money for active transportation by pedestrian. So we got some good things, not really what we wanted, but it wasn't completely hopeless. And I think I just want to leave you with, you know, on this question because the good grassroots engagement and good current values up front. It's happened across the board, education, similar things happen.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great example. Across the aisle. I'm wrong. Yeah, you gave some great examples of some of the benefits or strategies, like other alternative vocabulary.
Yeah.
Something
Not alternative facts, though. Yeah.
Something I learned from fellow researchers at my time with the staff department was about those co-benefits of the best of like soil health and public health from air quality. You find any traction with publics there on public health. That's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think people are recognizing and especially along transportation routes, they're seeing, you know, higher rates of asthma. So the whole notion of being able to attribute that to something, we have a colleague in the House who is a Republican who drives an electric car for that very reason. He has asthma and he recognizes the impact that internal combustion cars have on it. And so I think the whole piece of the public health impacts is a newer discussion being had at the Capitol, but I think it's one in the last couple of years, we've had a few joint hearings between the Climate and Energy Committee and the Preventative Health Committee, and really brought in some great experts from the university and elsewhere talking about the public health impacts, the disproportionate impacts to low-income communities. And so I think that this is a really important issue that we need to do more on. But yes, it's, I think, definitely one of those issues that is being seen and recognized. I will say oftentimes the more conservative voices don't necessarily live in the areas that have higher population and have more public health impacts from climate change. But I think they're seeing it in terms of, you know, how their livelihoods and lives are being. So I think they're seeing it just maybe.
I don't know whether this is an example of recognition or not, but your question prompted us. I had a conference committee we had on transportation. I think it was in 2019, and to the point that Representative Aiken made, one of our colleagues, Representative Lee, who represents parts of the north side of Minneapolis, you know, has been a very consistent advocate of you know, clean buses and clean you know, transit vehicles of all kinds. And so he did a bill that we had on our side, on our transportation bill, to give priority to areas impacted by, combination cumulative impacts of, air emissions from various toxic sources, lead, whatever it is. So in his community, they have those high rates of asthma. They are disproportionately impacted. So we had a discussion about this in the conference committee, and one of the suburban Republican conference said, well, I don't want those buses in my neighborhood, the dirty buses. And I'm like, and so, it was just sort of this odd reaction to that. So, maybe there is recognition that, there needs to be, let's say, like you said, that, a clean transportation system is necessary for a variety of reasons, but it should be for everybody. It's not an either or. And, but, at this point, prioritization should be given to, 500 communities and others that are disproportionately impacted by a variety of health issues related to all of our systems, whether it's manufacturing, or transportation, or energy.
As I'm listening, I'm thinking about the twin challenges of climate policy. So you have climate denialism on one side, but then on the left is really having a sense of urgency about climate with other pressing needs that we have right now. And I think over the last few years, Frank, Boo, and Patty, and so many others have done a really good job. We've been working hard to connect those dots between racial equity and climate, and really trying to see them more and more as central issue for us. And so I think as we've had that conversation, public health is really connecting those dots, and we're seeing the ways that climate policy is having multiple impacts at the same time, as far as public health is concerned, improving environmental outcomes is concerned. Just across the board, the good climate policy brings with it so many other benefits too. And then as far as and racial equity and climate are two extremely difficult conversations with Republicans. But we keep pushing on it, and they can't avoid it anymore. And so I think that's those are newer conversations that happened in the last 50 years.
Just one thing I forgot to mention. There's an organization called Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate. And, maybe, I don't know if there's a website or there's information you can get, you can Google them, Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate. And, they gave some really amazing testimony in front of one of our climate action policies pre-COVID. And, the amount of climate-related health issues staggering. And they presented that research to us, and if any of you have an interest in that, there's some impact in Schuler, it's very involved in that organization. That we recommend you connect with them because they just landmark work. And climate has been recognized by a variety of health care professionals, organizations. So it's really great.
Like we brought that connection up because we do actually have a student chapter organization, Health Students for a Healthy Climate, that's also out of the School of Public Health for the last collaboration. Yeah, in the first event in this series, we were talking about cities and counties and local government units and kind of implementation actions that they're taking on the ground in communities across Minnesota. And some of the conversation was about how a lot of that action depends on state level funding allocations. And so let's speak to how you make those decisions, allocating your state budget to there's some urban other areas that have specific needs.
Well, my area of focus is really in line with what Northfield needs. So I'm in Northfield. Northfield has a local climate action plan, very engaged on climate, but our central challenge is water. So the Canada River goes through Northfield. It's beautiful, except when it floods, and we've had 100 to 500 year floods in the last 12 years. And the most significant thing we can do to try to mitigate flooding in Northfield is to hold water back on the land. And so more soil health practices, better water storage options, about groundwater to infiltrate the soil, restoring wetlands. And those are all critical things, just to slow that water down. And this is true for, all communities. And I was just in a conversation with a local city councilor. They've been reviewing the floodplain and zoning for Northfield, and their eyes are kind of popping at the cost of trying to adjust infrastructure, new buildings, fill in basements, those sorts of things, but and say, we're gonna need help from the state. We can't fund this. Just had someone testify on my tree bill that's trying to help communities in replacing trees lost down low ash borer. In Northfield, that's 16% of our urban forest is ash trees, and it's going to be over $1 million to do that work. And we can't do that on our own. And if you think about all the communities that are doing these sorts of climate impacts, the state has to be a strong partner.
I completely agree. My roots are in local government. Before I went to the legislature, I was a city council member in the city that I live in. And so I recognize the role and the importance of the role that local governments play in addressing climate change. There's a bill that's a part of our climate surplus proposal that's giving grants to cities and counties to be able to develop these climate action plans that some cities have already put together, but not enough cities. And so we need our local governments to understand their vulnerabilities and their risks and what they can be doing differently with the tax dollars that they do have so that they're investing them appropriately. And so I think to Todd's point, there are so many cities of different sizes that have different economic abilities to be able to address their situations. And so many don't have the capacity, the economic capacity, the funding capacity to address what they need to be doing. And so the state absolutely needs to be a partner. And we have a committee at the Capitol, the bonding committee, capital investments, and that's really another way of saying borrowing money. So it helps local governments be able to do projects. And our chair, Representative Lee, which Frank referred to just a moment ago, is super focused on how we can help cities be more adaptive and resilient. And so, yeah, we absolutely need to be partners all across all jurisdictions to address this. We all need to be in it together to get where we need to be in this climate issue.
Yeah, I completely agree with what my colleagues have said about this, and there are really great initiatives happening. It's really not, it's throughout the state. Like Forest, Minnesota, for example, has this incredible, climate plan. There are organizations, I think it's called Climate Smart Municipalities, that are really working hard and looking at everything from zoning to how to implement zero waste plans. And that's really, really critical. It's a big sea change from about 10 years ago when myself and my colleague in the Senate, Senator Dibble, introduced the bill that required, climate mitigation as part of local planning and zoning processes. And oh my gosh, the city's really went a little crazy and stopped that one. But that's changed. That's changed. That's changed. But of course, we want things to move quicker. I will say, however, that it's important to just make sure that these plans are really comprehensive. And Hennepin County is one of the only counties that has a zero waste plan. Fantastic. And here we have, in the city of Minneapolis, we're one of the only large cities in the country that can do curbside organic compost. And one of the most important things we can do for the climate, and Hennepin County is Minneapolis very involved in that. But then there's one problem, right? Hennepin County owns and operates the downtown garbage incinerator. That is one of the top, it's in the top 25 sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. This is a big problem, for the climate. And, I think a lot of the materials that are in that are compostable and recyclable, and they're getting burned. And of course, there's toxic air emissions that affect disproportionately, the north side. And so while they have a good plan, you have to read the fine print, right? And, this should be phased out. It is not the highest and best way we can. So if we're truly to get to zero waste, which is absolutely critical for any local climate plan, we can't have landfill in the park. And I actually had one last, I had a bill. I'm imitating my manager, Paul Wellstone. He always used to say, and one last thing. I had a bill that, incineration is considered renewable energy instead of. That a garbage burner is treated the same way as wind and solar. And state law, this is a gap that waste industry was able to muscle through and use. And so we had a bill passed the House, at least to say that the trash burning in Hennepin County could not be considered renewable. I have to get my incinerator.
Frank is
Sound
famous for his incineration.
That's great. Well, so we're at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, with several students, studying policy. Advice, would you give them about working on state level climate action? What opportunities exist and what skills do they need?
Well, so I'll just speak as someone who never thought I would be a state legislator. I thought I was destined to be a band director. My parents were both music teachers. And I was just increasingly, both also working in organizing locally as a church pastor, deeply concerned about the direction that we're going, and started thinking about running for office and thought, the more people who get elected, those who run. And they're just an ordinary person. They have to let them decide about it. And so if you have thoughts about running for office, the legislature is filled with ordinary people who just decided to run. And I didn't go in with any particular expertise, like some people have values. And I've just been learning a lot and developing some expertise as a tech. So I'll just share my example as far as the legislative path. That's something we're thinking about.
And I will say, I think get involved. Clearly, you're going in and participating in events, and that's great. And find groups that share your values and get involved there too outside of school. Maybe it's with the city or with some local nonprofits. The last couple of nights, I've done a couple of panel things with the 100% campaign that's really focused on the transition to 100% renewable energy, and Sierra Club, and there's so many MM350. There's so many organizations, Clean Water, that are looking for people who are passionate about issues, and it allows you to build a network and see what learn more about the issues that are important. And your voice is so important. Engage with your legislators. When we hear from people, our constituents, that's where we get most of our, oh, this is important. I'm hearing a lot about climate change. Look at all these emails that I've gotten, look at all these phone calls I've gotten. So, connect yourself with people who are like-minded and get involved. I think that this, again, was not a path I ever thought I would be on. I just kept following to the next step. I got involved volunteering. I got, they have a park board, natural resources. That's a great place. I was on the park board, and there's an election for us. Maybe I could. Okay, well, I'll try. And so just look to that next step and keep surrounding yourself with people that are like-minded, and not just like-minded though, because we have to convince other people about why this is important that we work on climate and other important issues.
I don't know much to add. I think they said it all. I would just have to say, in terms of my journey, I mentioned, being inspired by Paul Wellstone, but there was actually an issue. I wasn't a lobbyist. I didn't really come up through the political system, and so that's why I'm sort of shocked myself that I ran for public office and succeeded. It wasn't in the plan, but between sort of Paul's inspiration and actually a bill that we were working on incineration in the 90s at Clean Water Action. It's the first time I interacted with legislators and elected officials, and I had that same kind of moment, Representative, where it's like regular folks. They're just not a bunch of hire fully lawyers. I didn't know what I didn't really know what legislators were about. Yeah, Laura, I can tell you, you've got a whole diversity, a whole crew out there. And so, so then I think the seed was planted. Hey, I think it's there. But of course, what Representative Baker said, so many great grassroots organizations we could be involved with, and we could learn some of those skills. The public sector is a good opportunity for you. A lot of cities, counties, and council, all levels of government, have opportunities in planning and public policy. And there's also, in the business sector, small businesses are doing all kinds of work promoting and addressing climate. So, any sector where you would look for work, I would encourage you, if this is a strong passion of yours, or whether it's climate or environmental issues in general, you can get a job and get paid. This can be career. And also at the legislature, there's opportunities that aren't just, the elected office. We have in transportation, rely on two nonpartisan fiscal staffers that are both comfortable and just do incredible work. They're the ones that they're the ones that write the laws, right? They're the ones that write the law. So just endless opportunities, and I'm at your service and beck and call. Want to talk to the phone. At least information.
Just a quick word about the next step in my, so I'm not running again, because I believe that the progressive agenda, climate agenda really hinges on us doing a better job of organizing in smaller communities in rural areas. So I want to give my time to that. And but I really wasn't aware of all the options until I was at the Capitol cycle. So many places to plug in. And so, like Patty said, it was, follow your passions and interests, and there will be opportunities.
Great. I have follow-up questions. But sure, take time for the audience. So I think we have time right now for a little Q&A. Questions from the audience, otherwise I'll ask them.
Yeah, I like this.
Thank you all for being here today and speaking on these issues. So I'm Sophia. I'm an environmental policy student here at Woodland School. But I'm actually from Duluth, where I work at the Duluth Environmental Protection Agency. And within the past couple of years, Duluth has been deemed a climate refuge city. And I'm wondering if in your time at the state legislature, you've come across any plans or proposals around climate refuge and really what that will look like for the next couple of years moving forward.
Well, understanding that climate is going to cause people to be relocating, I think yeah. So I don't know that I've heard specifically about initiatives or proposals. Certainly interested to learn more about what Duluth is doing and how we can partner with Duluth and other cities, but I don't know of any offhand.
What comes to mind for me is I've been doing a lot of leadership on a statewide climate action plan. Samantha Bay has been leading on providing funding for local plans, and I think it's that with more and more, we need more and more planning to have conversations locally about where are we going, what will this future look like, and so I think that's an activity at the state level that's interacting with
I'm curious about how
That's a really great question. I think my focus, I'm working a lot with Chair Hansen on this bill as a chair of the environment committee, is just trying to get funding out there for grants for cities to make sure they can replace the ash trees that they're using. And then talking at the same time about just the huge impact that trees can have on students in school and the environmental justice issue that having more tree planting is in all so we have a lot of challenging conversations with what we call the landlord caucus in the legislature. There are a lot of landlords that are very resistant to moving. I think we just we have to have that pressure coming from multiple directions to make those changes and say that everyone deserves healthy communities that are safe and survive.
I would only maybe just add to that, that we do know that the city is considerably hotter because of the lack of tree canopy and so much, asphalt. And so it is a climate justice issue. And I think it's an opportunity for the state and cities to partner to, to make plans to ensure those kind of communities are being targeted and prioritized in retreeing or reforesting the urban areas. And so we know the multiple benefits, whether it's air quality, temperature, even just the aesthetics and having the green around can provide so much benefits socially as well as physically. And so we understand the benefits. And so I think it really comes down to the city and state partnering, and it's around, being very targeted. We need to do this. And I think there are ways to have to work, but you need the political will to be able to say, we're going to mandate that this, reforestation or putting trees here, or every time you are redeveloping to whatever degree that needs to include this, and this. And so I think there are, local planning and permitting levers that can be pulled to help incentivize the carrots and sticks to get that to change. But you're absolutely right. It's an issue. I'm working on a bill that is directing climate action tax credits to homeowners. And I have a colleague, Representative Her in St. Paul. She's like, okay, so what can we do for renters? Because they deserve to have those same opportunities. And so we're working on a bill targeted for that. But I think your point is well taken, and certainly an issue that we're seeing. I think there are ways we need to push harder to require landowners to do this.
I'll just very quickly, I think I covered it, but this is a fantastic question. You're spot on about the issue about renters sometimes being left behind on a lot of these things. And so on Tuesday, I have a bill with Representative Esther Advaje, who represents parts of downtown as well. We learned that, we're very concerned that people who live in multi-unit buildings, apartments, co-ops, condos don't have that same opportunity for composting as homeowners. And this, of course, disproportionately affects BIPOC communities, but affects everyone. You should be able to get to give us 30% of the waste stream. And you don't even have the opportunity to compost these and recycle it. One of the most effective things we can do to run climate. And so, we have to give folks those opportunities. So we have a bill, to get a grant program so that if the building owner wants to do it, they can get some resources, and we can get you set up, and you don't have to throw out your food waste. Just simple things like that to make our program, our climate agenda much more inclusive. The renters so few opportunities. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more.
Thanks for being here. I'm wondering about your perspectives on reconciling the tension between, as you said, needing to act boldly, but with the divided legislature, kind of what you need for incrementalism and compromise, and where you draw the line between pushing something or tabling it to next year and saying this is good enough. Because I feel like that's a tension that exists across sectors and jobs. And so, how do you think about that person question?
Hard. It's frustrating. And I think we all agree what we need to be doing, and then there's what we can do. And so I think that makes us reach further, because we're probably going to maybe end up back here. And so, we have Todd and I are on a committee, the Environment Committee, and Chair Hansen is reaching really far because these are, important issues that we're talking about and working on. And the other side doesn't want to. And so it's that whole finding the common ground and the places where we can move. And then we work really hard during the election with the hope that we can flip the Senate and have majority in both bodies so that we can really get stuff done. And so that's where I try and then work hard to hope.
Your question is very much on my mind today. Because, as Patty said, it is very difficult. And, I went into politics and I hope I still bring this, with like, a sense of, possibilities and hope and really pushing an agenda that can, reflect this grassroots movement. But, inside the Capitol, especially in divided government, how do you move that agenda forward is a very, very vexing question. And so I'm taking the big risk tonight with the bill. For many years, there's been this idea out there that part of the general fund is generated by auto funds. So in general fund funds and education, because it has this transportation nexus, should go to roads and bridges. Well, first of all, there were two reasons I oppose that, right? It shouldn't just go to roads and bridges. And the general fund is really important, in terms of what it funds. And should it go to transportation? I'm not so sure. So this bill is moving and getting a lot of momentum inside. We just ignored it for a while. Tonight I'm saying, all right, this is going to be a thing. Then 40% of that needs to go to public. And oh my God. It is causing a lot of tension. And so, so we're going to have quite a hearing, but, sometimes you just have to do that. And whether it ends up in legislation that's in transit or not, at the end of the day, I'm not sure, but, sometimes you just have to do this, especially the other side is talking about this thing. How do we leverage our values? How do we leverage our vision? To be important. Because, this bill as it is completely unacceptable. As I said, 40% for transit, including some way in Minnesota, will really help climate and help.
I think that this is really, really hard. And I think it's a bold man of it. The bold conversations at the Capitol, what Frank's walking into, despite the tension and resistance, is what can capture the public's imagination of the vital future that we need and how we get there. And so we have to be doing that. And those conversations do shift, just like the whole conversation at the Capitol and the conversation we're having at the state. And then you get to a point where you have to grab what you can, and kind of wrestle with like, can we accept this? Is this a good deal? And as some we afford to wait, and it's both knowing that conversation is going to come back the next year, like the conversation is going to continue, and then what can our values stand? And I envy the lawyers who like come in with all this negotiating experience. As a pastor, I feel like nothing has really prepared me for that. It's like I'm trying to avoid, like anytime I'm negotiating as a pastor, I'm losing. Like that's like the opposite situation.
There's more politics in the church than at the legislature.
Yeah. But we have to pass that vision, and and we talk about vision bills sometimes at the legislature, and you have that conversation thinking that maybe in 5 or 10 years this will start getting traction. We have to talk about zero waste is one. Frank's certainly been a leader on so many things that now we're seeing starting to bear fruit.
Well, we're at time, so thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you all for coming to campus today, for sharing your energy, for all the advocating you do on behalf of all of us in the state. So thank you, Aaron, for facilitating the conversation today. We've got 5 minutes left, but we'll probably be lingering here for a little bit. The point of these conversations is not only to hear from some great people, but also to connect with one another. We're in a room full of people who are passionate about climate action and we want to build those bridges across departments and across campus. So I did this last time. I'm going to challenge you all once again to talk to at least one person you don't know before you leave today. Step outside your comfort zone. And there's more food back there, more drinks. We thank you all for coming today as well and encourage you to come on April 14th when we're going to talk about climate action at the national level. Thanks again. Have it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. We're gonna miss him. And as well as doing that,